was conscious of whether wearing a hoodie for a vlog is the right thing to do, but never mind, it's too late, we're going to do it. Welcome back to the Data Protection Diaries and welcome back to the vlog. Today's video, we are going to be talking about something slightly different to what we normally do. We're going to be talking about gap analysis, how to do a gap analysis, and what you should be looking for if you want to conduct a gap analysis within your business. Now, you may be sat there thinking to yourself, why would I want to tell you how to do your own gap analysis when ideally we should be selling you our gap analysis so that we can do it for you? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. The first being that not everybody has the money, the funds to be able to carry out a gap analysis with an external party or a consultant like iStorm. A lot of people that are looking for a gap analysis or are being offered a gap analysis don't necessarily know what it entails or what a good gap analysis should look like. So today I'm going to talk about what a gap analysis entails, and also, if you really want to, how you can do it yourself. So if you find this video useful, if you find this content interesting, please do give it a like, comment, share. If you're not already, please do subscribe to the channel as well. It is really useful for YouTube to know that people find this stuff interesting, and we just like to get to 500 subscribers because it just seems like a good market to get to. Anyway, enough of me waffling on. So today we are talking about gap analysis. So a gap analysis is a process, an approach, a bit like an audit almost, where you look at an organization's compliance and you assess the gap between where they are and where they should realistically be, depending on whatever criteria, legislation, framework you are balancing them against. For the purpose of this, obviously being the Data Protection Diaries, we're going to sort of link this loosely to the GDPR, but the principle is the same no matter what you are assessing and what gap you are analysing. First thing to do when you are looking to carry out a gap analysis is to understand the scope of the activity. So what is it that you are looking at? What are you comparing it against? And how long have you got to actually carry out that work? This is incredibly important because if you are looking at a large framework, if you're looking at ISO 27001, if you're looking at a gap against the entire GDPR, if you're looking at doing a gap against the GDPR 27001 and information governance best practice and alike, that is going to realistically take quite a lot of time. Now, depending on your business, depending on your budget, potentially, will also determine how long you have got, and that will define what your scope is going to look like. Nobody wants a gap analysis that's going to take between 5 and 10 days, especially not if you're an SME. If you're a huge corporate entity, then this video probably isn't applicable to you anyway. So the first thing that you need to do is define your scope, define how long you think you have to carry out the analysis, or work out your budget so that you can determine how long you've got in terms of cost, and then work out what it is you're actually going to look at and what you're going to benchmark yourself against. Step 2. So once you have defined your scope, once you've worked out how many days you want to carry out this particular activity over, you now need to define and identify who your key stakeholders are. Now, this is one of the most important aspects of carrying out an effective gap analysis. This doesn't really change whether you're an external consultant like we are, or whether you're looking to do this internally. The principle always remains the same. To carry out a gap analysis, you need to understand what the current process is and the current documentation is, and where that documentation and those controls and those processes need to be. Now, unless you are heavily embedded in the organization and know absolutely everything that is going on, you are not going to know all of the little intricate details of every process, every procedure, and every policy document, and how that impacts on the wider review. So what you need to do is find the people that do know that information. Now, in general, if you're carrying out a gap analysis, especially against something like the GDPR or data protection, you normally want to speak to people from operations, so people that are dealing with the front of house part of the business, dealing with customers, dealing with agents, dealing with clients. You also want to speak to finance. So how is information being processed? How are they using information? Where are they collecting it from? HR, of course, you always want to understand more about the HR processes, how HR is managing employee information, privacy notices, subject access requests, for instance. And then on a more operational side, again, people like team leaders, team managers, and if you have front of house staff or front line staff, be that people working on the phones, talking directly to customers, you also want to gain some insight from those individuals as well, because you're never going to know what little processing activities they might be doing and how that may differ from the company policy or the company procedures that were drafted 2, 3, 4 years ago. Who knows? In addition to that, and lastly, you also want to make sure that you are speaking to senior management and speaking to people from the IT team as well. If, of course, there is an IT team in place. If not, and you can get hold of them, try and speak to any outsourced IT provider or anybody generally responsible for IT, because again, you need to understand what their processes are like. You need to understand how they're getting linked across to the other business processes. So it's very, very important when you're doing this, when you're carrying out a gap, that you understand those key stakeholders and you go and identify the right individuals before you even start getting to work. Step 3. Once you've identified your scope, you've identified who your key stakeholders are, you now need to start to understand what is already in place. If you are carrying out a gap analysis, or you've decided that you want to carry out a gap analysis, it is very likely that something is already there. There is generally some kind of structure already in place. There's generally been some policies already written, some procedural documentation, and there's generally activity going on. This is usually the case when we are called in to carry out a gap analysis and the client actually wants us to check how that's been going on. Is the same level of activity still being undertaken? Are processes still being followed? Are policies being updated? And are they still accurate? You can do this again by talking to your key stakeholders that you've identified in step 2, requesting as much information as you possibly can. Policies, procedures, training records, logs, incident logs, risk registers, information asset registers, absolutely anything that you can think of that may in some way be linked to a wider sphere of regulatory requirement or best practice is always good to have a handle on, because once you have that information and you're then talking to your key stakeholders, you can then start to marry up what's going on in the business and what the documentation and the framework thinks is going on in the business. Step 4. Reporting. Now, reporting is always going to be the most important part of any gap analysis, because once you have the information, once you understand what is currently going on in terms of policies, procedures, controls, you've identified your key stakeholders and you've worked out what your scope is, and you are mapping each of those things back to your original scope and then determining what the gap is. How you document that is incredibly important. We have seen, and I have been involved in so many times in so many different occasions with organisations where a report was previously done and it didn't fulfil any kind of business benefit. For a report to be beneficial to a business, it needs to be clear and it needs to be user friendly. There is no point in writing a report that is full of industry jargon that's full of article references and just tells people what the regulation says. If the individual or the company that's consuming that information doesn't have the knowledge and the understanding to be able to action that. When you're writing your reports, make sure that you're using clear, friendly business language. You're avoiding jargon, you're avoiding pointing to articles, and you're actually talking about the things that are going on within the business. This is also important when you're looking at how you explain your findings. So try and avoid creating opinion, try and avoid giving a viewpoint based on your experience, and stick to the facts. What did you actually find? What did you actually see? What was going on? Because once this report has been issued, that is when you can start to do some root cause analysis and find out why that policy hasn't been working, what's actually gone on. Having a viewpoint and having an opinion is obviously good, but from the client perspective and from your business's perspective, the business just needs to know what has actually happened, and then they can work on how to fix it. Stage 5. So the final stage of this video that we're going to talk about is around ensuring that when you're delivering that report and once your report is ready, that you provide some form of remediation activity or some form of suggestions or recommendations for remediation. There is nothing worse for an organisation that has undertaken a gap analysis or has requested that a gap analysis be undertaken than when they are issued with a report that doesn't actually tell them how to fix any of the things that have been identified. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, that may sound like it flies in the face of what we deliver as a consultancy here at iStorm, because if we're telling you what you need to do, then surely we're doing ourselves out of business. But that's not the point. The point is that we and any good consultant will want the organisation or your organisation to be able to deal with their own issues. And to be able to do that, they need to understand how they can fix the things that were identified. Of course, if you're delivering this as an external consultant, the client may ask you to come in and help fix those things, but they may also want to fix them themselves internally. The same really applies if you're delivering this from an in-house perspective. So if you have been asked to carry out a gap analysis, there is no point in telling the business what they've done wrong if you're not going to tell them how you're going to fix it, what resources you potentially need to fix it, how much that's going to cost, and how long it's going to take from an internal perspective. A gap analysis is only useful if there is some kind of end game, and that end game can be easily explained through that reporting process. So whatever you do, don't just give somebody a list of things that they're doing wrong. Give them a list of actions that they can do to fix those things, and you will find that your business and the organisation you are working for is in a much, much better place to move forwards. There's obviously a lot more that goes into completing a gap analysis. The important thing to note here is that there is no right or wrong way for doing it. There is no one set template. There are templates available from the Information Commissioner's website. There are templates that you can easily find online. In my experience, and over the years that I've done this, I found it easier to allow things to be quite fluid. I try not to have too much of a structure in terms of a template. I try not to have too many checkpoints. And I like to allow the conversation to move and change naturally depending on who I'm speaking to, what they have to say, what controls and what processes are available within any different particular organisation. No two businesses are ever going to be the same. So sometimes if you have a checklist, you can get a little bit bogged down by thinking about it as a tick box exercise. Whereas if you allow the process to roam freely, you may find that yes, you're not specifically sticking to one particular sector, so you're not just sticking to GDPR, but you start pulling in wider information governance and even records management best practice, which is actually going to be much more beneficial to the organisation in the end. As always, this is a fairly succinct view of the world, but I hope that it has given you some insights into how to conduct a gap analysis, or some insights into what you should be looking for if you're looking for somebody else to conduct a gap analysis for you. As always, if you have any questions, please do get in touch, and you'll catch the website and the email address at the end of this video. You can also comment down below, and obviously we get back to every comment. We do really appreciate you watching these videos, so if you have enjoyed this content, please do like, subscribe to the channel, and we look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thanks very much.